If you're tired of wondering which of your marketing efforts are actually paying off, you definitely need to incorporate a UTM strategy into your business. UTMs are simple bits of code that give you valuable data on your marketing efforts. In my last video, we talked about what UTMs are and the incredible depth of information that's available to you when you use them. If you missed that video, please click the link above or in the description box below to watch that now. In that video, we covered the what about UTMs, and today we're going to talk about the how. How to create a UTM, where to implement them, and how to find that precious data that they'll actually give you. So let's get started. If you're new here, my name is Kari and I'm a business operations specialist. I help successful businesses with messy metrics clean them up so they can get simple, accurate information from their data, enabling them to grow more quickly and more efficiently. So let's do a quick recap on the basics of UTMs. UTMs are parameters that get added to your links, and when they're utilized along with your regular Google Analytics setup, they'll give you more in-depth information about your marketing performance. To create a UTM, you add these parameters or pieces of code to the link that you're already using. These parameters are what give you more specific information about the traffic that is coming to your site. And the beautiful thing about UTMs, they can be used whenever you're sending traffic to a website that you own. You can see if your traffic is coming from individual emails or email campaigns, social media platforms, ads, and so much more. Now, when we get down to actually creating UTMs, there are some really important things that you need to keep in mind. The first one is that case matters. Always make sure everything is in lowercase when you're creating UTMs. If you have the same word with one instance in lowercase and another in capital letters, Google Analytics will actually see that word as two different things. So for example, if you use the source Facebook with a capital F for one UTM link and Facebook with a lowercase f for another, it will actually separate that into two different sources rather than recognizing that it all came from one place. That doesn't really help you when you're trying to gather data. And yes, there are ways to clean up that data within Google Analytics itself if you happen to make that mistake, but it is so much easier to create clean data from the beginning. So let's just avoid that from happening in the first place. Number two, spacing matters as well. You cannot use spaces when you're creating UTMs. You have to use hyphens or underscores instead. If there are any spaces that show up in the link, it will actually break your link. Number three, consistency really matters. The more consistent you are, the better your data will be. So let me explain what I mean here. One of the biggest challenges you'll face when you're starting to use UTMs is that it takes effort to make them. You need a new UTM for each link, campaign, or source that you're using. And it can be a lot to keep track of all those UTMs and to keep them consistent. Something that's worked really well for me in managing the consistency of my own UTMs and those for my clients is keeping track of them on a spreadsheet. This way I can check that I'm using the same naming conventions every time I create a new UTM. So here's an example. When I create a UTM that comes from my weekly newsletter, it includes source as FGmail, medium as email, and campaign as weekly newsletter. By keeping these three parameters consistent, I can easily sort and analyze the data once it comes into Google Analytics. If I was to only keep the source and medium consistent, but use different campaign names instead of newsletter, I'd have a really difficult time tracking changes in the conversions that only come from my newsletter traffic. So on to number four. Don't forget that UTMs are visible. UTM links are not very pretty looking when you want to share them on social media posts, but luckily you can shorten them with a link shortener. Once they're clicked, however, anyone can see that full link in the URL bar of their browser. It doesn't really sound like a big deal, but it is important to be mindful of the fact that people can actually see them. Plus, if you are creating different ads that cater to different segments of your target audience, people, including your competitors, can see exactly who you're targeting in your UTM parameters if you just have all of the words spelled out and written out for them to see. You want to make sure that you're not spilling your secret marketing sauce in this way. And if you happen to be referring to specific demographics in a not so flattering way, that can definitely be off-putting, so be mindful of that. Another important thing to note is that if you're using the dynamic UTM creation tool within Facebook Ads Manager, it automatically pulls in the names of your campaigns, ad sets, and ads and uses those as your UTM parameters. And it doesn't necessarily pull in the correct source or medium that you would use elsewhere to be able to pull your information in a way that makes sense. You'll have a tough time keeping your data consistent and easy to analyze in cases like this, as there will be little to no commonality to actually be able to sort by. So what's the solution for these kinds of challenges? I recommend using abbreviations that are easy to understand and use consistently. So for example, if you're targeting the audience of a specific well-known personality, you could use their initial rather than their entire name. So think TR instead of Tony Robbins or MF instead of Marie Forleo. And last but not least, a key thing to remember when creating UTMs is to be concise. You want your UTMs to be descriptive, but you also want them to be as short as possible. You saw how long UTM links can get anyway. So for example, if you want to use an email subject line for your term, I wouldn't want to use the entire subject line that's probably 50 characters long. Instead, use a shortened, unique version that helps you to identify the email that you're referring to. So for example, if your subject line is, "Can you believe this happened on my last business trip?" you could shorten that to business trip so you could easily identify which email you're actually referring to. And whenever possible, use standard abbreviations that make sense, like USA instead of United States of America. You can even keep another spreadsheet of abbreviations for your products or campaigns to help keep track of them and make life easier for you and your team. So how are you doing? Are you still with me? We just covered 5 key tips to remember when creating UTMs. Case matters, spacing matters, consistency matters, UTMs are visible, and please be concise. Now that we've covered the rules for creating UTMs, let's talk about how to actually make them. I'm going to turn my camera around and show you a couple examples of online tools that you can use to help you out. So here we are in the Google Analytics Campaign URL Builder. I'll make sure to drop the link to this in the description box below. But when you come to this page, you can see it gives you the options to fill in all of your own information so you can create the UTM that you need to be able to include in your marketing materials. We're going to use the example here of a weekly newsletter that I'm sending out, and we're going to fill in the information so you can see how it creates that UTM for you. The first thing we're going to do is fill in the website URL that you want to be pointing people towards. In this particular case, in this newsletter, I'm just sending people to my own homepage. You'll see that a few of the parameters, as we've discussed before, are mandatory when you're creating a UTM, and those include source, medium, and campaign name. They all have the star beside them so that we know that they're ones that we have to use. The campaign source here is going to be FG Mail because that's the name of my email service provider. The medium is going to be email since that's the type of traffic that we're sending. And then in terms of the campaign name, I like to use weekly newsletter so that I can start to group all of those together. The only other one that I use for this particular case is under term, and there's a couple different ways you can do this for your emails. I personally like to do it by date just because then I can easily pull up and see which one was used. Some people prefer to use their subject line for their email. Either way works. You just want to make sure that you're staying consistent with whatever it is that you decide to go with. So I'm going to go with date. So if we scroll down here to the bottom, you can see it's now created a UTM for us. So we can see the original URL here, and then everything from the question mark afterwards is the UTM. That's going to provide that additional information to Google Analytics. You also have the ability here to click to shorten it right away, or you can just leave it as is if you're going to be embedding it into an email, which is the way that I would be using it. So I would actually just take this, copy it, and in the place in the email where I would normally put karipoppleton.com, I would include this entire URL so that all of those links and conversions that come from that email are now being tracked within Google Analytics. The second option that we have is actually through a Chrome extension, which is the Google Analytics UTM Builder. This basically works in the exact same way as the campaign URL Builder did as well. So we're just going to go through and fill in the information in the same way so you can see how it produces the same type of UTM. So here you can see that I've added in all of the same information into this Chrome extension that I did into the campaign URL Builder. And you can see that in the same way it's created a final URL for us that contains the original URL along with all of the UTM parameters that gives Google that extra information. The only thing I would caution you with here is just to be mindful that you're putting in the correct information under the correct category, just because it falls in a little bit of a different order than we typically would see. And also just to note that here we see the word keyword instead of the word term. Those are used in different places in Google Analytics to mean the same thing. So please just ensure that you're putting that in the correct spot. This URL again now can be used within the email in place of the original link, and it would include all of those extra parameters. So make sure that entire thing gets put into the email in place of the link that you would want to add into it. So now that you've put in all the work of creating UTMs and implementing them into your marketing, let's make sure that you can actually see the results. Let's head over to Google Analytics and see where that information will actually be available to you. So here we find ourselves in the back end of a Google Analytics account. This is a demo account, so I'm not showing you any data that you shouldn't be seeing, but I do want to walk you through here so you can see where you can find your UTM data within your Google Analytics account itself. We want to come over here to the left-hand side under Reports, and we're going to choose Acquisition, then All Traffic, then Source Medium. As you can see here, you have a date range at the top right-hand side. You can see trend over the past week. And down here, we have a table that contains all sorts of amazing information. You can see it automatically is pulling in our source and medium, and we do have the opportunity to add in one more column. So if you click on Secondary Dimension, choose the drop-down, and I'm going to type in the word campaign. And now you'll see that it has updated to pull in the campaigns. Now this is done with the Google Test account. The way that they have their campaigns named is probably not the way that we would name them, but you can see that it starts to break it down. So even though all of this traffic here and here all came from paid Google ads, it's now being split out according to the actual campaign that it was sent for. And here you can see all sorts of information that comes in, including users, new users, the number of sessions that came from each of those sources and campaigns, the types of behavior they took on the site, as well as conversions. Now this starts to become really, really important as you can start to compare which of your different sources and mediums and campaigns is leading to those conversions and that revenue on your website. In the example that I just showed you for creating the UTMs, we use the same campaign for each of the weekly newsletters. Under campaign, it would just show up weekly newsletter in every one. If I wanted to get more granular to be able to see which newsletter was actually leading to specific conversions, I could come back up here to secondary dimension. And instead of campaign, we're actually going to put in the word keyword, which, as you remember, is an alternate word for term within Google Analytics. And now you can see that instead of the campaign, it's pulling in the keywords that have been associated with each of those UTMs. So while we can't pull in all 5 of the parameters in Universal Analytics to be able to get an exact view of the UTMs, this is a really great way to be able to find as much information as you can. So once you have your UTM set up and you're starting to use them in your marketing, make sure you come into Google Analytics here to see what information you're actually gleaning from those UTMs. Maybe you start to see that you're getting a lot of traffic from a particular source and medium, but maybe those people aren't converting. Maybe particular emails that you're sending out are getting a lot of traffic to your site, but once they get there, people aren't taking that next step. All of this starts to give you clues as to what you can tweak and to change so that you can have more of an impact with the marketing that you're doing. So now I've switched over to a Google Analytics 4 account so we can see similarly where we can pull this data from within that platform. If we come up here to reports, and then underneath Lifecycle, we're going to click on Acquisition and then Traffic Acquisition. So as we can see on the traffic acquisition page, we can scroll down past these first couple of charts and come down to the table on the bottom. This is going to look pretty familiar because it looks a lot like it did in Universal Analytics. Here we can see that this information is currently being sorted by channel group. We can click and change it to source medium. And we also have the opportunity to add one more dimension here. So we can hit plus. So we can choose campaign. And it will update with that information there. Or we can choose keyword, which will pull in term, and that might be the one that gives you a little bit more clarity on exactly where your UTM came from. And just as we saw in Universal Analytics, there's lots of data here that pulls in based off of that information. We can see the number of users, the number of sessions, and if we come all the way over here to the right, we can see the number of conversions as well as total revenue. This information is available if you have your GA4 account configured to track all of your purchases, but if you do, it's a great way to be able to see exactly which of your UTMs is bringing in the conversions and the revenue that you're wanting to see as a result of your marketing efforts. Now, what if you want to view your information in a different way? Google Analytics is an amazing tool, but sometimes the back end of it can be a little bit confusing. But there is another way. You can visualize your data in Looker Studio, formerly Google Data Studio, in a dashboard, such as this one. So let's say you're tracking a specific campaign for your upcoming webinar on Twitter, and you want to see how that campaign is performing. You can select the term and content and then see exactly which tweets are leading to those conversions on your website. You can use the drop downs to be able to go even more granular, to be able to see exactly what's working so you can replicate the type or topic of tweets that are really driving those webinar registrations. Beyond specific conversions, you can also use the data you gather from UTMs to ensure that you're not wasting time fixing things that aren't actually broken. So let's say you've set up an email welcome sequence for everyone who becomes a lead. Someone subscribes to your newsletter and they receive emails telling them who you are, what you're about, what you do, and so on. With UTM tracking set up in those emails, you can then see which users visit your site from which specific emails, as well as the conversion actions they take once they get to your site. This means you can see which emails are converting and which aren't. You can spend time working on those non-converting emails and leave the top performing ones alone. So where else can you implement UTMs? Things like evergreen email sequences, like your welcome sequence, or maybe you have another sequence that pushes towards a specific product or service. You can also use them for newsletter emails. Why not use them in your weekly or monthly emails? For any kind of email, simply substitute the entire UTM link for the regular link that you would use. You can also use them in social media profiles. You might be surprised at how many people are navigating to your site via your social media pages, or how many people hit your website from your Instagram stories rather than your Instagram profile. UTMs can tell you all of that. You can also implement UTMs for your social media posts. Are people finding your brand via Instagram, Facebook, Pinterest, or Twitter? Which are converting more? UTMs can help you figure that out too. Just remember to use a link shortener to make your UTM links prettier. And lastly, you can use UTMs for things like speaking engagements. Yes, you can even create a nice link or a QR code that will lead audience members directly to your opt-in from your speaking engagement. So by now, we've covered the 5 important rules for creating UTMs, how to create them in Campaign Builder or the URL Builder, where to find the data in Google Analytics itself, how to view the data in a dashboard like in Looker Studio, and the many places you can use UTMs to gather data on your marketing performance. Now you can begin implementing UTMs in as many links as you possibly can so that you can gain an even deeper understanding of the traffic that's coming to your sites. If you have any questions about creating or using UTMs, please drop them in the comments below and I'd be happy to help you out. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of my upcoming videos on how to make data-driven decisions for your business. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.